Today we welcome J. Scott Coatsworth back to the podcast. Scott writes stories that subvert expectations, that seek to transform traditional sci-fi, fantasy, and contemporary worlds into something new and unexpected. Along with his husband Mark, he also runs both Queer SciFi and Queer Romance Inc., sites designed to bring people like us together to promote and celebrate fiction that reflects our own reality. His latest book, The Stark Divide, was released in October. Welcome back, Scott.
Oh, thanks. Good to talk to you.
I love that last line in the intro I just did about bringing people like us together to promote and celebrate fiction that reflects our reality. That's really good.
Well, thank you. It's been a big part of what I wanted to do is find and then promote community in the LGBT and also sci-fi community.
Tell us about The Stark Divide, your brand new book that's just only been out a month.
Sure. Like I said, I brought props here. Stark Divide.
Yeah. If you're on the video, you got to see the very cool book cover.
Oh, thank you. This book actually has a long history to it. When I first was writing seriously back in my 20s, I had written a book called On the Shoreless Sea. And it was about this world that was a cylinder, and it was a self-contained world. And it was basically a generation ship going from here to someplace else. But it devolved into where it essentially was a fantasy type world in space. And I really loved the feeling of the story in that, but it went out to about 10 publishers, and all of them rejected it. And that was kind of my swan song as an author at that time. I just kind of gave up for a long time. When I came back to it seriously in 2013, 2014, I really still wanted to go back to the story, but I knew that one, my writing was not up to snuff anymore because I hadn't written in so long, and two, that the story itself needed a lot of work. So I thought, I really don't know where this world came from, how it was created. So I went back and decided to tell the story of when it first became a world, when it was created by mankind. And it started out with a story called Seedling, which is about this giant seed that's towed out to an asteroid in space and basically starts to devour it and become the world. And there were two other stories that followed that essentially became this long, epic sci-fi tale told about 20, 25 years. So for me, it really is kind of a cool thing in that it's one of my oldest projects, but it's also my newest. So it's really going back to what I loved to read when I was that age and still enjoy, but also what I had started so long ago, and now I'm actually kind of bringing to completion after all these years.
What was your inspiration for it?
When I used to read books like Anne McCaffrey's Pern, they always had neat things like the thread, right? And this other world and this stuff comes down. And so when I started writing sci-fi worlds, I tried to give each one a unique characteristic. So like in the story that eventually became my Oberon series, it's this half world out in space. In this one, I wanted to do something different. So I wanted a world that was going to be, again, that kind of fantasy sci-fi crossover feel, but also it's got this bioluminescent plant life on the world. So every morning, instead of having sunlight, because you're out in the middle of a void, you have this light as this world lights up and then goes dark. And I didn't know why that was when I first wrote it. I just knew that was my really cool hook that I was going to use. And again, that's when I went back and I figured out, the whole world's alive. And that's how it comes about. But so that was kind of the inspiration, was to do something that would give the world itself a unique flavor and character in the story.
Mm-hmm. What would you say how your writing evolved over the time between when you stopped with it and then picked it back up, and how did the story itself change? Did you make a lot of changes, or was it just kind of sprucing it up, so to speak?
Well, I'm going to answer it two ways. The writing itself, I really was very rusty, like I said, when I came back to writing. So I started with short stories and kind of worked my way back up again. But I had this idea in my 30s that I really was going to not be able to be a great writer until I reached my 40s, because I would have that much more life experience behind me and things to draw on that I just didn't have when I was in my 20s. But as far as the story itself, it actually isn't the original story yet, although we will get to that original story. I'm not sure if it's going to be this trilogy or if it will be after the trilogy that I'm working on, but it's a prequel. So it's an entirely new story that I wrote over the last few years. But it does explain, for my 2 or 3 people that actually read that other one before I sent it off, it explains how that came about. And it sets me up to retell that story eventually. But I think it's going to be an entire rewrite, just right from scratch, because so much has changed and I've got such a better understanding of what the world is about now, that I can really write it in a much different way than I could have in my 20s and what I did right. Mm-hmm. A lot more richness, I think, to it.
And who are the characters that we get to meet?
So there's a rotating cast of characters because it's told over these three different time periods. You have the original three characters. Colin is the starship captain, and Jackson is the engineer, and Anna is the scientist on the ship that are basically taking the seed out. There's a mishap during that voyage, and it almost doesn't happen. But as you go on, you get to see those characters move on to the next phase, and you start to see other characters come in, and like the kids of those characters, and so it kind of weaves through. The thing I really like about it is you get to see kind of fast forward and see what happened to those people in the next space of time. So it's in the one book you kind of get these three different snapshots of what's going on in their lives instead of just getting the one book and then being done and then waiting for 6 months or a year for the next thing to come out. So, but they do all kind of weave together, and then I add new characters as it goes.
And you've hinted at the series, and then Stark Divide is the first book in the Liminal Skies series.
Right.
What else is coming in that series? Is that just the first piece of this trilogy, or how does this all lay itself out?
Yeah, there's three different books. I've basically got the second book is done now. It's out in beta read, so it does go forward another 15 years or so, and you see a lot of things happen. Part of the story revolves around religion and artificial intelligence and how those things interact, and how something that's made by man can be divine. And so you kind of get into a little bit more of that, but there's a lot that happens in the second book. Things really change quite a bit and set the stage for eventually getting to this point where you don't have the same technology in the world, although the world itself is technological. You get to a point that it's gradually approaching more of a fantasy sort of basis over time. So the third book, I've got ideas about it. I haven't plotted it all out yet, but all three of them are set up the same way, where it's basically three novellas strung together, three epic pieces to kind of bring the whole thing together. So I have an idea where it's ending, where it's going, but I get back to that in about 4 or 5 months, and that's when I'll really kind of lay everything out.
Okay, very cool.
Thanks.
How would you describe your process for world building?
Ooh, yeah, again, a lot of it goes back to my sci-fi background. So if I'm writing romance, it tends to be more character driven. I'm looking at who the characters are and how they relate and what the stories are going to be. When I'm writing stuff that's more on the sci-fi side of things, although it often still, well, up to this point, always still has queer characters, it really is driven by the plot and by the world itself. And so I really do try to kind of think of, as a sci-fi reader, what would I like to see? What would be really cool to me to see? What kinds of things projecting in the future? There was a movie called Her that came out a couple years ago that was about a guy that fell in love with an artificial intelligence program. And it was just so really cool to me because it was so close to now. And yet it was such a great leap forward. You could see literally how we would get from here to there in a matter of 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so it just managed to kind of give you that really cool, this is coming kind of feeling. And I love kind of playing around with those things.
Nice. Now, kind of moving away from sci-fi a little bit, in October, you actually brought a close to your weekly series of River City Chronicles. What brought that to an end after 2 years of publishing weekly?
I'm kind of schizophrenic. I've got my romance and contemporary side, which almost always has a little magical realism in it, although not my Christmas story. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's something that I'd always planned to do an arc. So I'd always planned to have a certain number of chapters and then come to an end. I'm kind of following the Tales of the City model Armistead Maupin did, but just for Sacramento instead of San Francisco. And so when I started the story, I pretty much knew that each character had some kind of secret, and that during the course of the story, I was going to tell what those secrets were. And so by about chapter 90, 95, you get the last secret, and then things just kind of start to wrap up. So I think when I hit about chapter 75, I had kind of plotted out at that point what all the rest of the chapters were essentially going to be, and I made a couple changes just to make sure I got in a few things that I realized I hadn't picked up on, but I knew it was going to kind of come down to that ending. So my plan now on the current set is to take that and do a book out of it. It was translated into Italian as I went, so I'm working to see if I can find an Italian publisher since I've already got the manuscript ready to go. And I'll probably self-pub here in the U.S. And put it out in both paperback and ebook form. But I really want to try to target folks locally here because it is such a local story. There's so many places that people reading it here will recognize, and I think it's just really cool to write about Sacramento. It's kind of my love letter to Sacramento.
Fantastic. Since you know we're getting ready to move there, maybe we should just read all of River City so we know what we're
There you
getting
go. You get all the
into.
recommendations in one place. My favorite restaurants, coffee shops.
Now, you just dropped a hint about a Christmas story. What's that about? Because we are, of course, headed right into the holiday season right now.
I had a story last year that came out that was a sort of post-apocalyptic zombie Christmas. The last two guys alive on Earth. And that was fun to write. But this year I really decided I wanted to do something that just totally unlike me, had no zombies, no sci-fi, no future, just a sweet contemporary, and it's a short story, short love story. So I was listening to the song Save the Best for Last, Vanessa Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And that one always like just grabs my heart, like how could you basically be with me and tell me all the things that are important about you and then go back to this other person and just, not be with them in that way. And that really kind of tugged something at me. So when I wrote the story, it was about two characters, and one that is the one that is in love with the guy, and the other guy that's with someone else and doesn't realize he's in love with him. So it was fun. It's set in San Diego, which is my first story there, and I just drew on our visits there and some of our friends for knowledge about the city. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to put together. So it's a sweet contemporary love story.
What's it called?
It's called I Only Want to Be With You. And it was somewhat influenced also by reacquainting ourselves with Ally McBeal and Vonda Shepard,
Mm-hmm.
who was the version of that song. And yeah, it just kind of clicked. It's like, yeah, that's it. That's what it is.
When's that coming out?
That'll be out, I think it's the 28th of December. They're doing a series of releases starting around the 1st, all the way through New Year's. And mine will be the second to the last one.
Okay, so we'll link people over to Mischief Corner so they can watch for that come out.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Angel Martinez has a book in there. I think there's about 10 or 12 altogether.
For people who want to find the Zombie Christmas, where can they find that one at?
So that one was published last year. That was in an anthology from Mischief Corner called This Wish Tonight. And it had, I think one was a contemporary, one was fantasy, and then mine was a sci-fi kind of dystopian. So
Cool.
that's still out from Mischief Corner.
We'll link people to that one too. So, looking past the holidays and into next year, what's coming up next for you?
So I've got a lot coming up. We just, of course, had Stark Divide come out in October. The next one, after the Christmas one, will be Lander. And Lander is the sequel to Skythane in my Oberon Cycle series. That one is in edits. In fact, I just sent back the first edits about 2 days ago. So I've got the cover on that, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. If you guys have seen the Skythane cover, it's very similar to this, but it's got really good-looking redhead Space Marine kind of guy. And the red tones and gold tones on it, just beautiful, by Anne Kane. So that's out in February. The next thing that I know the date, or the essential date on, is the one I'm working on now, The Rising Tide, which is the Stark Divide sequel. And that'll be out in October of next year. But there's also a series, it's going to be a trilogy called Marionettes in the Mist, which comes from the other serial that I was doing with Mischief Corner. And that is with Tony Griffin, Angel Martinez, and Freddie McKay. And we finished that one up back in the summer this last year. So that's going to be released as a 3-part series, a trilogy, essentially. And that'll be sometime in 2018, but I don't know what the date is yet. So those are everything that I've kind of got on deck besides River City. I'm going to get to the end of all this and finish the 2 trilogies and be like, I don't know what to do next. I'm just so much like lined up right now to get through,
I suspect it'll come to you before you get to the end.
Well, I did email Lynn today and asked her when she wanted, Dreamspinner asked her when she wanted the next book in Oberon, the next book in Liminal Sky. And then I mentioned to her that, I will need to sit down and talk to her and figure out what to write next. And maybe it won't be a trilogy because they always tell you that trilogies don't sell. The second one never sells as well as the first one, and the third one never sells as well as the second one. So it might be a standalone something. I don't know. I've got a lot of stuff that I could kind of go into. So things I could expand or go back to one of these and just do a 1-book thing, or who knows.
Mm-hmm. You're a busy guy because, you've just laid out a lot of stuff coming out on the writer side.
Yes.
In 2018, but you also do, these other sites, and you're starting up a new service as well. Let's start with the one that I think everybody best knows you for. What's new over at Queer SciFi?
I'm glad you asked. Renewal. So this is a third of our contest books from the Flash Fiction contest. It's actually the 4th contest, which gets kind of confusing. But the very first one that we did, it was called Endings, and we got 15 entries for it. And so there wasn't enough at that point to even consider doing a book. The second one was Discovery, the third one Flight, and now Renewal. And we basically give everybody a theme, and we say, you take this theme, take it however you want to, and give us a 300-word story. And it needs to be both queer representative, and it needs to also be speculative fiction, so sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal, horror. And then we go through them and read them and find the best ones. It's gotten better every year, and it's gotten more diverse every year. The first year we did 15 stories. The second year we had 110. The third year we had about 167, and this last year 207. And so just in terms of being able to select stories, it's gotten better. Mm-hmm. But we've also started to see more stories come in. We had one intersex one this year. We had a lot of transgender stories, some non-binary stories, some asexual stories. So we're kind of moving beyond just doing the male-male thing, although there's always still a lot of that because that's a very popular part of the genre. So that's the main first thing. We also, speaking of intersex, we had a really cool discussion yesterday on the site where one of our authors came in and just gave a talk about what intersex is and what it isn't. As a writer, if you're going to write an intersex character, what to write about, how it kind of works. And that's going to be up on the site in the form of a PDF sometime probably next week for people if you want to read it as a writer, if you're just curious about what intersex people are like, how that comes about. And the last thing on Queer SciFi that I want to highlight is Ben Brock has been working on our reviewing side for a long time. But he's now pulling together a reviewing group of folks that is going to be taking a lot more requests. And so we should have a bigger review program in place in the next couple weeks. And so if you want to, or anybody else out there who's a writer wants to submit books that fall into the queer speculative fiction umbrella, if you go to queerscifi.com and click on reviews, there's a form right there. You can submit that, and it'll get added to our queue for the reviewers to pick up. So that's kind of what we're working on right now.
Is Renewal out now for folks?
Yeah, Renewal came out about a month and a half ago.
Okay.
It's in ebook format. It's also in a regular paperback, and then this one is really cool because there's a color one that has all the illustrations in just gorgeous color.
Oh, amazing.
And the illustrators on those, I always forget one of them. So it's Rebecca Murray, Mila May, who did the cover last time for Flight, and Gus Lee. And Gus did the cover this time as well.
Now, when we talked to you back in February at the Dreamspinner conference, we were chatting about Queer Romance Inc., mm-hmm. which had just been on the cusp of, getting out there into the world at that point. How's that gone now that you're almost 10 months into it?
It's going really well. We just passed a 2,000 bookmark on the site. Queer Romance Inc., for those who don't know, is basically a site. It was our reaction to the fall of ARE when ARE closed all romance ebooks, closed in December last year. But we didn't want to tackle the sales and the royalties part of it. With Mark and I, there's just no way we could do that kind of thing for hundreds and hundreds of authors and that many books. So we decided to make a site that just made it really easy to find exactly what you want in queer romance and books that feature queer characters. So that's what we focus on. It's got a lot of filters, ways to kind of get down to books, a lot of different breakdowns on the titles. We're almost up to 500 authors, probably hit that this month. And we're seeing between 13 and 20,000 visitors a month, which is good, but I want to see that continue to go up. So the next thing we're working on is to make the site more sticky, basically, if it's webmaster term or SEO term, I guess. Have reasons for readers to come back to the site again and again and again. Like on Facebook, you're always going in to check your messages and see if anybody's liked your stuff. And so we're going to try to build in some more reader interaction with the site without doing reviews, because we found on Goodreads, for instance, Goodreads is a fantastic resource. It's a very broad resource in terms of what they cover, but authors are scared to go on there because the reviews can just be so difficult to read. So we decided from the get-go that we weren't going to do reviews on the site because there's enough other places to get that. But we do want to make it easier for readers to come in and use the site and maybe mark books they like, put a TBR pile together, that kind of thing. Nice. So that's the piece of it that we're working on.
Cool. And, again, as if you don't do enough already, you're also now, in a soft launch phase on a blog tour service as well for authors. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we wanted to get more into author services. We kind of started with Queer Romance Inc., and I've done tours now for a couple of years, both for myself and for some friends of mine. And it just seemed like a natural way to go, especially given that there's not any blog tour company out there that I'm aware of that really gets into the sci-fi fantasy side of things specifically. It's not all that we're going to do. We're going to also just do general romance stuff. But we are going to have a specialty with working with sci-fi blogs and trying to get stuff out there beyond this really warm, fuzzy community that we have here in the queer romance and MMFF, et cetera, romance community, but really try to start pushing out into the mainstream sci-fi community as well. So that's kind of the thing that makes us unique, I think, among other sites, because there's at least 3 or 4 really good blog tour companies that I know of that are working in the romance space already. But we thought we could offer something a little bit different as well.
Now, for people who might want to check that out, what's the URL for that one?
Sure, it's Other Worlds Inc. INK, like Queer Romance Inc. INK. It's kind of our new brand thing. .com.
Cool. We'll definitely link up to that in the show notes so that the authors in the audience can go check that out.
Cool. Yeah, we just did a soft launch. We're doing one tour for an author right now to test out the site and the service. And we've got a couple more tours that we're going to be doing in tandem with each other. Because ultimately we want to do multiple tours each week. So once we get past those, then we'll throw it open and start taking general tours from authors. But we're still kind of making sure we have all the processes down, and we're getting people set up in different mailing lists depending on what kind of book you're selling. Is it a romance? Is it not a romance? Is it a genre book, et cetera? So we can really try to target a bit where it's going so that folks don't get hit up, just with everything that's not relevant to them.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So what's the best way to keep up with you online as the author, Scott?
Sure. Well, you can find me at jscottcoatsworth.com. Really easy. I'm on Facebook also. I've got a Facebook page at facebook.com/jscottcoatsworth. And then Twitter, because Twitter doesn't like having long things. I could only fit JS Coatsworth, but it's Twitter at jscoatsworth.com. Sorry, just JS Coatsworth. If you want to find me, and then you can get to the other ones from there.
All right. Well, we'll link up to all those in the show notes along with the new book and everything else we talked about. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for a little bit today.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.